He almost died while he was in a hospital bed. They sold his land behind his back, but the town forgot one thing. You never bet against a rancher who's got nothing left to lose. This is what happened, and this is his story. Subscribe to Quiet Rancher Stories and hit the like button so more folks can hear stories where justice wins in the end. My name is Hoyt Bennett. I'm 58 years old, and I've worked this same land my entire life, just like my father did before me, and his father before him. It's 400 acres, hard won and held, and it's always been enough. The town knew me, or thought they did. I was the quiet rancher, the one who kept to himself, preferred the rustle of paper ledgers over any bank's computer screen. Folks would call me old school, I suppose. A relic, maybe. That's what I heard them whisper sometimes. A holdover from a time that had mostly faded. I didn't mind. I had my horses, the cattle that knew my voice, and Dusty, my old dog, always at my heels. Never married, never had kids. The land was my family. The rhythm of the seasons my steady heartbeat. I watched the sun come up over those same scrub oaks every morning and set behind the familiar ridge every night, and I felt a contentment that most folks seem to chase their whole lives and never quite catch. My hands were calloused, my face weathered, but the soil was honest, and I was proud of what I'd built, what my grandpappy had built, and what I'd kept alive through droughts and bad winters. I never bothered anyone, and I expected the same in return. The world could speed up all it wanted, chase new money and new ways. I was fine right where I was, just me and the dust and the wide-open sky. My boots knew every dip and rise of this land like it was part of my own bones. I saw a quiet purpose in things, a slow, steady kind of truth that didn't need flashing lights or loud talk. That was my way. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and clear, the kind of day that makes you feel like anything's possible. I was out alone, pushing a small herd of yearlings towards the north pasture. Nothing unusual, just the creak of the saddle leather, the low moans of the cattle, and Dusty loping ahead, kicking up dust. My mare, Old Bess, had been a steady mount for years. We were crossing a dry creek bed, nothing but loose rock and memory of water, when something, a rabbit, a snake, I never quite saw it, bolted from under a mesquite bush. Bess spooked. She reared, a quick, violent jerk that caught me off guard. My right foot slipped the stirrup, then the left. The world turned upside down. I hit the ground hard. The air left my lungs in a whoosh that felt like a punch. I saw Bess's flank, then the sky, then a sudden, sickening jolt. A pain exploded in my side, sharp and insistent, like something inside had come undone. I tried to move, to call out, but my voice was just a gasp. The next thing I knew, Dusty was nudging my face, whimpering. The sky was still blue, but it was spinning now, and the sun seemed too bright, too far away. I remember the sound of a distant truck, then the quiet hum of something mechanical, and then nothing, just the deep velvet blackness that swallowed everything. They told me later it was a broken rib, an internal bleed. They flew me 2 counties over, to a hospital I'd never seen. For days I just lay there, a stranger in a bright, clean room, the hum of machines a constant lullaby. I was floating, dreaming, waking up to faces I didn't know, then drifting back down into the dark again. They said I'd survive, but it would be weeks, maybe months, before I could stand straight again. While I was lost in that fog, they said they called my cousin Clay. He was my next of kin, my power of attorney, the one person I trusted to watch over things. I didn't know it then, wrapped up in the hospital's strange quiet, but while I was trying to remember my own name, Clay was moving. He'd always been a slick one, too fond of shiny things, and too quick with a story. He owed money around town too. I'd heard whispers about card games and bad investments. I guess he saw his chance. He walked into the county office, straight-backed and solemn, like he was delivering grave news. He told them I was abandoned, that the ranch was just sitting there, untended, said I wouldn't be able to work again. Not really, not enough to manage something like the Double H. He said it with a kind of sad conviction that must have sounded believable to folks who didn't know the Bennetts. He found a real estate investor, a smooth talker from out of state, and together they cooked up a deal, a quick sale for cash. My ranch, my grandfather's land. They didn't even wait for me to get a clear thought in my head. They just signed the papers, fast and quiet. The buyer, I found out later, wasn't just some random speculator. It was a land consortium, a big outfit controlled by none other than Mayor Rutherford. Rutherford had been wanting to put up some fancy resort, a luxury retreat for city folk, for years. He'd eyed my land, but I'd never been willing to sell. Clay, it turned out, was the key to unlocking what Rutherford couldn't buy. While I was lying there fighting to breathe, they were shaking hands over my life's blood, carving up my legacy. The thought of it, when I finally pieced it together, felt colder than any winter wind. It was more than just a betrayal. It was a theft of something sacred, done under the cover of my weakness. They moved fast, like thieves in the night, only it was broad daylight, and everyone looked the other way. Weeks blurred into a slow, aching recovery. The hospital room became less a fog and more a cage. I learned to sit up, then to stand, leaning on a cane that felt like a foreign limb. My ribs still screamed with every breath, but the doctors finally gave me the nod. "You're cleared to go home, Mr. Bennett," the young one said, a polite smile on his face. "Take it easy, easy." The word tasted like ash. I arranged for a hired wagon to take me back, the old truck too much to handle with my new limp. The ride was long, the landscape outside the window passing in a blur of familiar but distant hills. I closed my eyes, picturing the worn gate, the old barn, the porch swing. Home. When the wagon finally pulled off the main road, the driver slowed. I looked up, and my stomach dropped. My gate was gone, replaced by a tall, unfamiliar chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Beyond it, a yellow bulldozer sat silent, a monstrous metal beast, and a sign, new and stark, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." My ranch hands, the men who'd worked with me for years, were nowhere. The corrals were empty. The barn, the sturdy heart of the ranch, was just a pile of splintered wood and twisted metal, like a giant had stomped on it. "What in God's name?" I muttered, pushing myself up. The driver, a young fellow I didn't know, looked uneasy. He pointed to a small official-looking paper tacked to the fence post. It was a county notice. "It was all legal, Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice quiet. "They said you were unfit to manage your affairs, couldn't work the land. It's been sold." The words hung in the air, cold and final. Unfit. My ranch. Gone. My breath hitched. I just stood there, leaning on my cane, watching the dust devils dance across the desecrated ground where my life had once stood. My first instinct was to walk straight onto the property, tear down that fence, but my legs wouldn't carry me that far, not yet. The cane felt like a dead weight in my hand. So I did the next logical thing. I headed for the town bank. I'd always trusted old Mr. Abernathy with my money. I preferred paper ledgers, yes, but the bank was where the big numbers sat, the cattle sales, the land taxes. I walked in, my limp a stark statement on the polished linoleum. The young teller, barely out of high school, looked at me with wide, pitying eyes. I asked to see my account. She typed a few clicks, then her face went pale. She called over a manager. It was Sarah Jenkins, a girl I'd known since she was knee-high, whose father I'd helped out when his barn collapsed. She came over, her hands clasped tight. "Hoyt," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. Clay, he had power of attorney. He drained everything." She kept her eyes on her shoes. I just stared at the screen. A big round zero. Every dollar gone. Not just the cash, but the reports showed sales of my entire livestock, the cattle I'd bred for years, the horses, even my old tack, Dusty's saddle, everything. Clay had sold it all off, piece by piece, while I was laid up. He hadn't just sold the land. He'd sold my entire way of life, down to the last horseshoe. Sarah tried to explain, to apologize, her voice breaking. "He said you wouldn't be coming back, that you were permanently incapacitated. The papers, they looked legitimate." I looked at her then, her face crumpled with guilt. I just shook my head. "Don't you worry, Sarah," I said, my voice steady, even to my own ears. "I ain't mad at you. I ain't even mad at Clay. Not really. What good would that do? But I'm just not done yet." The words hung in the quiet bank, a promise whispered to myself and to the empty air. The town hall meeting was packed, every chair taken, people standing along the walls buzzing like a hive. I slipped in through a side door, kept to the back, hidden in the shadows near the old furnace. My cane clicked softly on the floor. No one noticed me. They were all focused on Mayor Rutherford, standing proud at the podium, bathed in the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights. He was a man who loved a stage, loved the sound of his own voice. He puffed out his chest, smiled a politician's smile, and spread his hands wide. "Friends, neighbors, fellow citizens," he boomed, his voice echoing. "I'm here tonight to announce a new era for our beloved town, a new beginning." He went on, talking about the Rutherford Ranch Resort, how it would bring tourism, jobs, a new kind of luxury. He talked about progress and opportunity. He even had slides flashing pictures of manicured golf courses and swimming pools and cabins that looked like something out of a magazine. He claimed my land, the Double H, had been generously donated to the project, a visionary gift for the future of the town. He neglected to mention the man whose land it actually was, or how it had been acquired. The town applauded, a rising tide of cheers and whistles. Most folks I knew didn't like my quiet ways. They saw my old ranch as a stubborn block to their idea of progress. They wanted change, wanted new money, and Rutherford was promising it. They clapped for their future, built on the bones of my past. I just stood there, unnoticed, a ghost in my own town. My hands, still tender from healing, clenched around my cane. I watched the mayor's face, the greedy glint in his eyes, and the faces of the people, so easily swayed. It wasn't anger that burned inside me, not the hot, wild kind. It was a cold, hard resolve, settling deep in my bones. With my ranch gone, my bank account empty, I had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, not anymore. I spent that first night in the truck, parked on a forgotten dirt road. The next morning, I drove into town, feeling the eyes on me, or imagining them. I thought about the old church, the one with the steeple that leaned a little to the left. Its barn, disused for years, stood empty behind it. It was the only place that wouldn't charge me, wouldn't ask questions. The Reverend, a kind man who remembered my mother, just nodded when I asked, handing me a spare key without a word. The barn was dusty, filled with old farm equipment and the ghosts of harvests past. I cleared a corner, swept out the straw and cobwebs. My bed was the old horse blanket from the back of my truck. My pillow, a worn saddlebag. It wasn't much, but it was a roof. In the quiet evenings, with Dusty curled up beside me, I started to journal again. Not just thoughts, but observations. I mapped out the town, drew lines and circles around properties, noted names, debts, patterns. I wasn't just sitting there, feeling sorry for myself. I was planning. I started small, walking into town each day, just a quiet man with a limp and a cane. I'd nod to folks, offer a simple hello. I began speaking to the quiet ones, the ones who didn't go to Mayor Rutherford's meetings. The old barber, Mr. Henderson, who still used a straight razor and cut hair like it was an art. The farrier, Walt, whose hands were as gnarled as oak roots, and Mrs. Gable, the widowed librarian, who knew every story and every secret. They remembered me. They remembered the Hoyt, who helped without asking for anything, the one who didn't chase flash. They looked at me, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet understanding, and when I spoke they listened. They always listened. Asterisk. Asterisk. Chapter 8. A stranger with a satchel. Asterisk. A few days later, a new vehicle pulled into town. A black sedan, shiny and out of place among the dusty pickups. Out stepped a stranger. He wore a clean, tailored suit, not the kind you saw often around here. His hands, I noticed, looked soft, unblemished by manual labor. People started talking right away. Whispers flew faster than a prairie fire. Some said he was a lawyer, here for the mayor's project. Others, a banker from the city, or maybe a potential investor for the resort. He ate alone at the diner, spoke little, and carried a worn leather satchel wherever he went. He walked with a quiet purpose, but his eyes were always scanning, taking everything in. I watched him from a distance, from my spot on the church porch, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. That night, after the last light had gone out in the diner and the streets were quiet, I saw him walking towards the church. He moved deliberately, then turned towards the barn, his shadow long and thin in the moonlight. I stepped out from behind the old oak, my cane thudding softly on the packed earth. He stopped, his head turning. "Hoyt," he said, his voice low, a touch of surprise but mostly recognition. It was Ben Carter, my childhood friend. We'd fished this creek together, chased rabbits through these fields. He'd left for Austin after high school, gone to college, became something they called a private equity advisor. I hadn't seen him in decades, not since his mother's funeral. We didn't shake hands, didn't need to. He just nodded, a slight curve to his lips. We spoke in low voices, standing in the cool night air behind the stable. I laid out what had happened, all of it, leaving nothing out. He listened, his head cocked, his eyes unblinking in the faint light. When I finished, he just said, "So, what's the plan, old friend?" Ben didn't waste any time. The next morning, he was on his laptop, tapping away with those soft city hands. He asked me a lot of questions about money, about credit, about things I'd never paid much attention to beyond the paper ledger. I explained what I had, which was next to nothing, and what Clay had done. Ben just nodded. "We'll start small," he said. He had a way of speaking that was calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. We created a holding company. Dust River Holdings, he called it. A fake name, made up to blend in, to sound like just another anonymous investment group. I gave him a small stack of cash, the few dollars I'd squirreled away over the years in a hidden tin, and a few old coins my grandpappy had given me. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Ben used it to buy up debt, store mortgages from struggling businesses, town hall bonds that were overdue, farm loans that had gone sour, small purchases, sometimes just a few $1,000s here, a few hundred there. No one noticed. Why would they? It was all quiet transactions, little bits of paper shifting hands, registered in faraway offices. Dust River Holdings was just a name on a ledger, one of dozens, maybe hundreds, that came and went in the daily grind of finance. But for me, each piece was a thread weaving its way into the very fabric of this town. Every time a small business struggled, every time a farmer couldn't make his payment, every time the town needed to borrow a little more, we were there, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet offer. Ben moved with a surgeon's precision, unseen, unheard, acquiring little pieces of leverage, one by one. The slow game was always the best game. I'd learnt that from the land. Asterisk. Asterisk, Chapter 10. The land around the land. Asterisk. Asterisk. While Ben was busy with the numbers, I was busy with the map, the one I'd been drawing in the church barn. My old ranch, the Double H, sat at the heart of everything. But a ranch isn't just a patch of dirt. It's the creek that runs through it, the old wagon roads that crisscross its edges, the easements for power lines. I knew every inch of this land, every hidden spring, every rise and fall. I knew what the mayor's fancy resort would need. Access, water, gravel. I started buying up every parcel adjacent to my former ranch, the ones nobody thought were worth much. A small strip of land along the creek that provided the only reliable water access. An old forgotten wagon road that cut across a corner of public land. Even the easements, the rights of way that allowed people to cross a property for a specific purpose. Ben arranged the purchases, again under Dust River Holdings. Quiet, almost unnoticed. Then I bought the old gravel pit. It was run down, mostly depleted, but it was the closest, cheapest source of aggregate for any major construction project in the area. The mayor's resort, I knew, would need tons of it. Suddenly, the Rutherford Ranch Resort project started hitting red tape. Permits stalled. Deliveries stopped. The mayor, I heard, was fuming. "We need access rights," he'd yelled to his councilman, his voice carrying through the open town hall windows. "We can't get equipment in. We can't get water pipes across. Who owns all this little pieces of nothing?" He didn't know it was me, of course, just a quiet man watching the pieces fall into place, one by slow one. The noose was tightening, not with a sudden yank, but with a steady, relentless pull. The auction for the old grain mill was sparsely attended. The mill had stood empty for years, a hulking skeleton of wood and corrugated iron, its glory days long past. The town wanted it gone, an eyesore on the riverbank. The auctioneer rattled off the opening bid, and then silence. No one was interested. It was the same story for the old general store downtown, boarded up and collecting dust. And then for the sawmill, its blades rusted, its steam whistle forever silent. Nobody seemed to want the remnants of the old town, until Dust River Holdings started bidding. Ben handled it all, of course, through a local lawyer who just presented the bids without fanfare. Not high bids, just enough to win. A few thousands here, a few more there. The town council was just happy to get them off the books. They wanted new shiny things. They didn't see the value in the old, the worn, the forgotten. But I did. Within 2 months, Dust River Holdings, my quiet little shell company, owned nearly 25% of the town's usable infrastructure. The old mill, the general store, the sawmill, parts of the creek, the old roads, the gravel pit. All of it. Still, no one knew it was me. No one connected the quiet rancher who sat on the church porch with the sudden burst of anonymous corporate buying. I walked past these buildings, my buildings now, and saw them not as crumbling ruins, but as the quiet cornerstones of something new. They were leverage. They were the bones of the town, and now those bones were mine. It was a slow, steady acquisition, built on the town's neglect and Mayor Rutherford's short-sighted vision for a resort that would never quite get built. Ben worked fast. He had his network of legal contacts, city lawyers who knew how to untangle messy property deals. I had the facts. The doctor's report, clear as day, stated I was declared fit to return home weeks before Clay had sold the ranch. It detailed my recovery, the timeline. My cousin had claimed I was incapacitated, unable to manage my affairs. The doctor's words proved otherwise. It was a quiet legal case. Ben filed it under the name of Dust River Holdings, of course. But the core of the lawsuit was simple. Sale under false power of attorney. It didn't make headlines. Didn't get whispered about in the diner. It was just a paper filed in a distant county courthouse, a legal maneuver that slowly, quietly, began to turn the gears of justice. The mayor and his consortium were blindsided. They'd been so focused on acquiring land, cutting corners, they hadn't bothered to secure their flanks. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with tired eyes, looked at the evidence. The doctor's testimony, the forged documents, the hurried sale. She didn't hesitate. She issued an immediate injunction. All construction on the resort property was frozen. Every bulldozer, every foundation pour, Every delivery truck stopped cold, pending investigation. The silence on the mayor's land was deafening. No more dust, no more engine roar, just the wind whistling through the half-built frames. It felt good, the quiet satisfaction of a plan unfolding, a slow, steady burn. I walked by my former ranch, now a ghost of a construction site, and thought about how silence could be more powerful than any shout. The legal system, slow and bureaucratic as it was, could still be swayed by truth. The news about Clay didn't come to me directly, not from him anyway. It was Sarah from the bank, who called me at the church stable. Her voice a low murmur, like she was afraid the walls had ears. Clay, she said, was gone, vanished. The fraud charges had hit him hard. It wasn't just the false power of attorney that got him. Once the lawyers started digging, they found more. Forged signatures on other bank documents, small loans, quick cash grabs, all done in my name or in the name of accounts I didn't even know existed. He'd been taking little bites out of me for years, it seemed. His assets, what little he had, were seized. The run-down house he owned, the beat-up truck, even his prized hunting rifle. All gone, taken by the law to pay off what he'd stolen. I didn't try to find him, didn't care to. What would be the point? He was a broken man, running from his own shadow. The law has had a way of dealing with folks like Clay, a colder, more impersonal kind of justice than anything I could mete out. I suppose part of me felt a twinge of something, not pity, but perhaps a quiet understanding of how desperation could twist a man. But mostly it was just another detail in the grand ledger of things. He'd made his bed, and now he had to lie in it, wherever he was hiding. His removal from the board simply cleared the path, one less obstacle in the way of what needed to be done. He was a small player in a larger game, a symptom, not the disease. The real fight was still ahead. The real snake was still slithering. The mayor tried to ignore the lawsuit at first, but the frozen construction project was costing him, and the town, a fortune. Public opinion started to sour. He had to act. He called for a public sit-down, demanding a meeting with Dust River Holdings. He wanted to air it out, try to spin it, put a face to the anonymous company that was tying his hands. The meeting was set for town hall, a week later. The mayor expected some slick lawyer from the city, someone he could bully or charm. He didn't expect me. I walked in, not with my old worn boots and faded denim, but with clean clothes I'd bought from the general store, one of the ones I now owned. My cane was still with me, a steady companion, but I walked with a strong, deliberate posture. My back was straighter, my shoulders set. I moved to the front row, past the curious stares, and sat down. Mayor Rutherford looked up, saw me, and his jaw went slack. His eyes darted around, looking for the city lawyer he expected. "Mr. Bennett?" he stammered, his voice losing its usual bluster, a hint of genuine shock in it. "What are you doing here?" I looked at him, straight and steady. No anger in my voice, just a quiet truth. "You wanted to meet Dust River Holdings, Mayor," I said, my voice carrying clear in the sudden hush of the room. "Well, you found them." Then I leaned forward just a touch, resting my hands on the top of my cane. The air in the room felt thick. "You took my ranch," I said, each word a slow, deliberate stone. "So I bought your town." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft, sharp intake of breath from the people in the room. His face went from pale to mottled red. It was a good moment. The mayor's face was a mask of disbelief, then fury, as my words sank in, but he couldn't deny it. The papers were all in order. Dust River Holdings, my holding company, owned a quarter of the town. He spluttered, he ranted, he threatened lawsuits, but the game was already over. I simply nodded to Ben, who produced a neatly organized folder. Inside were the town hall bonds, the ones Dust River Holdings had quietly bought up. "These bonds are due," I said, my voice calm, "and Dust River Holdings is calling them in." The town treasury was crippled. They couldn't pay. They simply didn't have the cash, not after all the money they'd poured into Rutherford's half-baked resort scheme, and what they'd paid for my land. Town officials, their faces ashen, started to panic. The whispers turned to shouts. The applause that had once greeted Rutherford turned into accusations. He'd promised them progress, but he'd only delivered debt and humiliation. The town council called an emergency meeting. The people, now understanding the full scope of what Rutherford had done, how he'd gambled away their future, demanded action. It was swift and brutal. A snap election. A vote of no confidence. Mayor Rutherford, his face pale and defeated, was voted out of office that very night. No cheers, no goodbyes, just silence. A new mayor was sworn in almost immediately. It was Sam Miller, a quiet man who'd owned the hardware store for 20 years. I remembered him. He was just a boy, maybe 10 years old, when his fence blew down in a storm. I'd spent a whole Saturday helping his father fix it, never asking for a dime. Sam looked at me from the podium, his eyes holding a look of quiet respect. The old ways, it seemed, still had their place. With the mayor gone and the truth out, the legal review moved quickly. The evidence was irrefutable. Clay's fraudulent power of attorney, the doctor's testimony, the hurried, underhanded sale. There was no real fight left in the consortium. They knew they were beaten. The judge's final ruling came down like a hammer. The land sale was reversed. My ranch was returned to me, free and clear, as if the past months had been nothing but a bad dream. I rode out there the next day, not in a hired wagon this time, but in a borrowed pickup, Dusty beside me. The new chain-link fence was already down, ripped away by the county. The old gate, surprisingly, had been recovered from a ditch and propped back up. The bulldozer was gone, but the resort shell remained. A skeletal frame of steel and concrete, half-built walls, a ghost of Rutherford's ambition. Some people asked if I would bulldoze it, clear the eyesore, but I looked at it, standing there on my land, and a different idea took root. I left it. I let it rot. A stark, ugly reminder of what had been tried, what had failed, a monument to greed. I walked the boundaries of my land, feeling the familiar earth under my boots, the wind in my hair, the double H. That was its old name, but it didn't feel quite right anymore. It had been through too much, seen too much. I stood at the highest point, looking out over the fields. Dust Ridge, I said aloud, the name feeling right on my tongue. It was a new name for a new beginning, a name that carried the memory of the dust I'd kicked up and the dust I'd come back from. With Dust Ridge reclaimed, and the town starting to find its footing under a new mayor, I started to put things right, not for show, but because it needed doing. The church stable had been a quiet refuge, and I wanted to give back. The old library, a place Mrs. Gable loved so much, had been closed for lack of funds, another casualty of Rutherford's grand plans. I made a quiet donation, enough to get it running again, to bring books back to the shelves and light to the windows. Mrs. Gable cried when she heard. Then there was Dusty, my loyal, constant companion through everything. He was getting old, his steps slower, his eyes cloudier. I decided to build something in his name, a small veterinary clinic, accessible to all the ranchers, a place for the working animals that were the backbone of this town. I remembered the old workers Clay had fired, the ones who had worked my land, good, honest men and women. I sought them out, one by one, and offered them their jobs back. They accepted, their faces etched with relief. And for the young ranchers, the ones just starting out, facing high interest rates and hard times, I offered interest-free microloans. Small amounts, just enough to get a few head of cattle, to fix a fence, to buy seed. They looked at me with surprise, then with a kind of hope I hadn't seen in their eyes for a long time. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was a quiet force, slowly stitching the town back together, one thoughtful act at a time. It felt good, a different kind of harvest than crops or cattle, but just as real. Word travels fast, even to the city. My story, the one about the rancher who bought the town, started to spread. It attracted attention. One afternoon, a big, sleek black car, even fancier than Ben's, pulled up to the fence line of Dust Ridge. A man in an even fancier suit stepped out. A city developer with a slicked-back haircut and a confident smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He walked up to my porch, extended a hand. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Heard you pulled off quite the coup. Impressive." He didn't waste time. He offered to buy my land, Dust Ridge, for 10 times what it was worth. 10 times the value. Enough money to make me rich beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Enough to never work another day in my life. I listened to his pitch, watched his eyes gleam with dollar signs. He talked about potential, about future investment opportunities. When he finished, I just looked at him, then out across my land, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery colors. "Thank you for the offer," I said, my voice polite but firm, "but I'll have to decline." He blinked, surprised. "Decline?" he repeated, a slight edge in his voice. "Mr. Bennett, you're sitting on a gold mine. This is a life-changing sum. You can't buy pride, sir." I just nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. "You can't, but some folks try anyway. And some folks, well, they already got it. They don't need to buy it." He stared at me for a long moment, then smiled a thin, knowing smile. "Everyone's got a price, Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice full of city wisdom. I looked out at the familiar hills, the half-built resort shell rotting in the distance, and then back at him. "Not everyone," I replied, my gaze steady. "Just everyone you know." He got back in his car, the gravel crunching under his tires, and he drove away. The town slowly, quietly, began to change. The big, shiny resort never got built, of course. The The land where it was meant to stand just sat there, a permanent scar on the landscape, a reminder of what greed could build and then abandon. Fewer tourists came, which suited me just fine. More livestock, more work boots, fewer suits and shiny cars. The rhythm of the place shifted back, settling into something more familiar, more honest. People started greeting me differently now, not with pity or with the quick, averted glances of before. They'd nod or offer a quiet "Mr. Bennett," a hint of respect in their voices. They saw me not as a relic, but as the quiet man who had stood up for what was right, who had fought for the soul of the town without ever raising his voice. They saw that I wasn't just about money, but about something deeper. I never ran for office, never wanted power. That wasn't my way. I just wanted peace. Peace on the land that was mine, the land that had always been mine. I still rode my horse, though a new one now, across the fields of Dust Ridge. I watched the seasons turn, the grass grow tall, then wither, then return. The cows grazed, the horses ran, and Dusty, older now, still trotted faithfully at my heels. The town felt like home again, not just a place but a living thing breathing with a familiar, comfortable rhythm. It was a good feeling, seeing the old ways return, the quiet strength that had always been here, just buried under a little dust and ambition. I sit on the old ranch porch now, the one I fixed up myself. The wood is worn smooth, the paint peeling in places, just the way it should be. The sun is just starting to dip, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A fresh cup of coffee, black and strong, steams in my hand. The wind moves across the grass like a memory, a soft sigh through the tall stalks. It carries the scent of sage and damp earth, the familiar smell of home. Dusty, old now, and mostly deaf, snores softly at my feet. A neighbor's kid, little Billy, rides his bicycle down the dirt road. He stops, waves a small, enthusiastic hand. I lift my own hand, a slow, easy wave back. He pedals on, a small figure disappearing into the growing dusk. The quiet settles around me, deep and comforting. They thought they buried me. They forgot I was a seed,